Africans are members of the United Nations. They have subscribed to the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights of 1967 that came into force in 1977. Many African countries are parties to it, and as such, they are bound by its provisions. So the United Nations has given their position and is binding on Africans on the principle of pacta sunt servanda. Agreements are meant to be kept, and African members, African people, African countries being members of the UN, they are bound by their membership, the membership rules of the United Nations. So they are not stopping Africa from developing its regional criminal justice system and administration.
Chukwuemeka is a legal practitioner. Thanks for sharing your thoughts with us on Network Africa. Well, elsewhere, foreign ministers from the 3 Arab countries have underlined the need to create a political dialogue between rival Libyan factions in order to put an end to the turmoil that has rocked the country since its 2011 uprising. The ministers from Algeria, Tunisia and Egypt met on Monday as part of a 3-state summit aimed at ending years of political deadlock and lawlessness in the North African country. Speaking at a joint news conference in Tunis, Foreign Minister Kamé Yenoui says the crisis could only be solved by inviting all Libyan parties to the negotiating table. The 3 countries hope to act as intermediaries between Libyan Prime Minister Fayez Sarraj of the UN-backed government in Tripoli and Khalifa Haftar, a military commander who is supported by factions based in the east of Libya. And the head of the United Nations mission in South Sudan, David Shearer, says a lack of information on about 20,000 displaced people in the country's north is a real problem. Clashes broke out last month in Malakal, capital of the oil-producing Upper Nile region, between government soldiers and rebels, forcing tens of thousands of civilians to flee their homes.
The head of the United Nations mission in South Sudan, David Shearer, is on his first field trip to Malakal town after taking up the new position last month. He notes that government forces are making it difficult for aid agencies to reach displaced families affected by recent fighting in Malakal.
This is not the conditions that we want people to live in. We want the people to go back home. These are temporary structures. They've been set up to protect people, because outside of here, if these people left and went into the town now, they would risk being killed. Unless we have peace, unless we have the ability for these people to go back to their own homes, which are only just a few kilometres away, then we'll never see the end of this camp, and we don't want these camps to exist.
Mr. Shearer was accompanied by the UN Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights, Andrew Gilmer, and other officials on the trip. Ongoing conflict in the country has already forced more than 3 million of the nation's 11 million citizens to leave their homes and take refuge in camps in the country and in neighboring countries. Fresh clashes broke out around South Sudan's second largest city, Malakal, in January between rebels and government forces in a struggle for the capital of the oil-producing Upper Nile region. The United Nations says Malakal, on the banks of the White Nile near the country's northern border with Sudan, is largely deserted after civilians fled the fighting. The UN Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights, Andrew Gilmer, also expressed concern over violations taking place targeted at displaced families and has called for accountability on both sides of the conflict.
There are many stories of how men go out and they will be abducted and killed. Now, on the other hand, women feel they have to go out in order to try to buy some goods in order to sell them back in the camp, or to try to raise some small amounts of money somehow, but they risk being raped by security forces. So there is this terrible choice that women living here have to face. The choice is being raped or not having even the most basic supplies.
Oil-rich South Sudan has been mired in civil war since 2013, when President Salva Kiir fired his deputy Riek Machar. Since then, the fighting has increasingly split the country along ethnic lines, leading the United Nations to warn of a potential genocide.
Meanwhile, a government official says parts of war-ravaged South Sudan have been hit by famine and that nearly half of the country's population would lack reliable access to affordable food by July. The crisis in the country has prevented many farmers from harvesting their crops, while hyperinflation, which reached more than 800% last year, has put the price of imported food beyond the reach of many. Parts of the country have also been hit by drought.
The long-term effects of the conflict, coupled with high food prices, economic crisis, low agricultural production, and depleted livelihood options, are all contributing to the deterioration of the food security situation, resulting in 4.9 million people, which is about 42% of the population, estimated to be severely food insecure.
Food insecurity crisis today is largely because of the conflict, it's largely because of insecurity, it's largely because of the access challenges that humanitarians have periodically had. It's also because of attacks on humanitarian workers and also the looting of humanitarian assets.
Staying with food crisis, the UN's Children's Agency has followed its declaration of a famine in South Sudan with a warning that similar food crises are affecting 3 other countries: Nigeria, Somalia and Yemen. UNICEF says that almost 1.5 million children are at risk of starvation. Its Deputy Director, Justin Forsyth, says that political failure and conflict are to blame for the situation, which he says could be averted if aid agencies are given safe access to those in need. Yemen is driven by civil war, while northern Nigeria and Somalia are grappling with Islamist insurgencies. Well, we'll have more on that issue, talking about the food crisis, when Network Africa returns in a moment. Plus, 74 bodies of migrants wash up on the beach near the Libyan city of Zawiya. Do stay with us.